Hey folks, Lenny Lawson here, the car guru. Still fighting this head cold, this cold weather. And, it's just runny noses and sore throats and hard to breathe. Other than that, well, I started to say other than that, I'm fine. But I'm not. I had to go to see my orthopedic surgeon yesterday. I've been having a lot of thigh pain. If you listen to this program very often, I have said several times that I had a new hip put in. And that was almost exactly a year ago. It'll be a year on January the 30th. And apparently, the prosthetic or prosthesis, whatever you call it, that goes down inside my femur is loose and causing thigh pain. Not supposed to be loose, supposed to be tight. My bone is supposed to have grown around it. Shame on you, bone. You didn't do what you were supposed to do. I'm making light of this. I don't feel light about it, but it's just like if you went into a car dealership and you just thought you needed a tune-up and they told you that, no, we're going to have to replace your engine. Except, you don't actually have somebody cutting on you. So previously, I had the anterior approach where they put the hip in without really, they just make an incision and spread all your muscles apart, and they put it in. Just easy peasy. But this time they have to cut through my muscles in my hip. And I said, is that worse, doctor? He said, yeah, that's worse. That's a little worse, Lenny. Recovery's a little tougher, but that's the way we used to do all of them. There was a time when a hip replacement was basically you were in the hospital for a week. They kicked me out on the same day, the last one. I don't know what they'll do on this one. I'm still hopeful that maybe they've read the x-ray wrong. But, sometimes we don't always agree with the diagnosis, but it is what it is, right? Okay, trying to get on topic, let's talk a little bit about a couple questions that I have been asked over the last few weeks. One of them, I had a customer in the service, let's see, they were in the Ford service side. They were in the waiting room. Hey, Lenny, come over and sit down. So I went over and sat down. And he was curious about the Blue Cruise, which is what Ford calls their autonomous driving app, I guess. My new F-150 has it. I used it when I was driving down to see my hip doctor. And it works really well. And he was just wondering if, how do you pay for it? How do you get it? Can you have it installed on another car? The answer to that question is no, you can't install it. You have to buy a vehicle that has it. If your vehicle does not have autonomous driving capabilities, then you can't go to Walmart and to their automotive section and pull one off the shelf and install it. That won't work. It has to come from the factory. And in Ford's case, and I'd say most of the other manufacturers are going to do the same thing, it's something that's free for, I think, the first 90 days, maybe 6 months, and then you have to subscribe to it. So what does that cost? Well, it's not cheap. I think it's close to $700 a year. So am I going to do that? No. Is it more relaxing to drive down the road with your hands on your lap, but you still have to watch the road because if you don't, the car will chastise you. It's got 2 or 3 cameras looking at my eyes, trying to make sure that I'm keeping focus on the road. If I look over at my beautiful wife for more than like 3 seconds, a big warning light comes on, and I get a ding, ding, ding. So I re-engage with what's going on. If I have this big tea, for example, in my hand, if I hold it up and take too big of a swig, it can't see my eyes, same thing happens. So it just wants to make sure that you're paying attention because that's what you should be doing. Do I feel comfortable becoming a passenger in a car that's driving itself? I don't know. Do you? Would you? Would you trust the technology that's in the vehicle? I decided I would, much to my wife's chagrin. She said, are you sure you should be doing that? I said, honey, I got my hands right here. If it does something squirrely, I can grab a hold of the steering wheel and we'll be fine. And so we did. I made it all the way to Knoxville. I turned it on at the Morristown exit, Lowland Morristown exit, and I rode the rest of the way to Knoxville without touching my steering wheel. I did change lanes, and the way you do that is you turn on your blinker. You just pull your blinker left hand. If you want to go left, you pull it left. It takes a second, but then it'll move on over because it's looking for any vehicles that are coming up or that are out front. But like I said, it maintains the distance that you set between you and the car in front. It'll go all the way down to 0 and will take back off again. I mean, it's pretty cool. I don't really mind it, but you can't get it from Walmart. You have to buy a car that has it available. I think General Motors has some vehicles that do that. Several of the BMW, Mercedes. I don't know about a lot of the imports as far as Honda and Toyota and so forth. I would say that they probably do have hands-free operation now, maybe on a higher-end car. The only thing we have it on would be like an Expedition, or like some of the Nissans do it as well. We have it on F-150s, and I think it's about it. But it's called Blue Cruise. So what else have I been questioned on? Oh, yeah, I was driving my new truck. My new F-150 is a Power Boost, meaning that it's a hybrid. Now, what are the advantages of the Power Boost? Well, it's $1,800 retail option. You tell me if it's worth it, okay? I increased my fuel economy by about 4 miles per gallon in the city. And no, take that back. 6 miles per gallon in the city, 4 miles per gallon on the highway over a regular 3.5 EcoBoost. How long will it take me to pay for the $1,800 extra? Long time. Now, the other advantage of it is that it has an onboard generator, 7.2 kilowatt generator. Does that mean anything to you? Well, what that means to me is I can plug in my house, basically. If I have the setup taken care of by an electrician, I could plug right into my house, disconnect the power from the utility, and probably power a lot of lights in my house, my refrigerator, maybe my oven. I mean, that would be stretching it. I can't power everything in my house at once. I would have to limit it. But, if I can turn on my heat when it's really cold and run that with my truck as it sits out there, that's pretty cool. I mean, that's a relief. Also, when you're camping, if you pull a camper and something's wrong with the hookup at the campground, you can just plug it right into your truck. Because with 30 amps, you can power at least one of your air conditioners. If it's really hot, you probably can't power most of them at the same time. But it'll do everything else in my camper. And that's happened to me. I went to Pigeon Forge, camped out at Margaritaville, and it was full. And we got into our spot, and I plugged into the electrical connection that they have out there, plugged it into the 50 amp connection because my camper's a 50 amp capability, and nothing. There was no power. So I tried the 30 amp. No power. So I had my Power Boost. I plugged it in my truck. Had power. That's comforting. So, is this something that you need? Yeah, I guess if you run a job site, for example, and you need a lot of different places to plug in all of your power accessories, all your tools, just about all of the people that build anymore, they don't use hammers anymore. They use nail guns and screw guns and things like that. And they take all these chargers with them, and they want to plug them all into your house. Well, if they have a truck, that truck, I think, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 120-volt plug-ins, and it has one 240-volt 30-amp plug. So again, I asked the question, is that worth $1,800? To me, it was. It's just something that I'll probably never use, but if I need it, it's there. And that's what a lot of people do. Okay, I'll be back in just 1 minute and answer some more of these questions. Okay, I had a doozy of a question from a listener somewhere. I'm not exactly sure where he was. I didn't ask him. But he had a question. He had 2 vehicles. One, he thought that he owed about $13,000 more on it than it was worth. And the other vehicle that he has, he thinks he has about $10,000 in equity. Now, I may have those numbers slightly off, but the situation is interesting because in his mind, based on his research, he has equity in one and an offsetting deficit in the other. There's this guy that was a senator from the state of Tennessee. I think his name was Jim Sasser. And whenever he talked about the deficit, I just loved to the way he said that. So that's where that came from. So his question was, what do I do? I sell these vehicles? What do I do in order to get out of this situation so that I can get into one vehicle and maybe lease it? So he was thinking, again, just breaking even or getting close to breaking even, and then going out and leasing the vehicle so he could get a new vehicle every 2 to 3 years. That's the main advantage of leasing. And of course, it's all dependent upon how many miles you drive on the vehicle. If you drive more than 20,000 miles a year, leasing is not for you. Anything less than that could be manageable. Now, there are some people that will stretch that some. If you go over the miles on a lease, if you drive 30,000 miles in 1 year on a 15,000-mile lease, then it's not like you have to park it. You're not going to violate any laws. It's just when you get to the very end, they're going to look at how many miles you bought. Let's say it's a 3-year lease, 15,000 miles a year, 45,000 miles that you can drive. If you drove 55,000 miles, you're going to have to pay 10,000 miles times whatever their charge is. It might be 20 cents a mile. It might be 30 cents a mile. But, you have to pay for mileage anyway. That's what I've always told people over the years. They say, well, I don't want to drive a car. I have to pay for mileage. That's no fair. Well, you're paying for mileage now. How's that? Well, if you drive a car and you put excess miles on it, we put that into our little computer. Now, we used to look in a book, and there was a mileage deduction, so many cents per mile over the average, which at that time was between 12 and 15,000 miles a year, depending on which book you were looking at. So now we put it in a computer, and it adjusts the value downwardly in the wrong direction. So you're paying for the miles. You trade your high mileage car in on a brand new car versus somebody trading in their low mileage car, same exact car, just has lower miles. You're going to end up paying more difference than they are because your trade-in isn't worth as much. So there's all these factors that come into play. But how accurate is he on his value? How do you get a real number that somebody will actually pay you for your car so that you know where you really stand? Because if you just look it up in a book, or if you go to Edmunds.com or KellyBlueBook.com, any of those places that will estimate values, those are exactly what I just said. They're estimates. That's not real money. You can't walk into a dealership having looked at one of those websites and say, Mr. Dealer, my car is worth this. He's going to say, well, sir, if you don't mind my asking, what are you basing that on? And you're going to say, I looked it up in the book. That's what it said on my computer. And he says, well, I appreciate that, sir, but sometimes the books don't take into account all of the factors. And then he proceeds to tell you what he's willing to pay you for the vehicle, and it's $5,000 to $10,000 less than you were thinking. That's a heartbreak right there. So this gentleman has these two vehicles, and he thinks he has equity in one, and he thinks he has a deficiency in the other, and he may be right, but based on my experience, he's probably wrong on both. So what did I tell him to do? I said to call CarMax. Go to a CarMax. They buy cars. They'll make you an offer. Carvana online, they'll make you an offer. Just about any dealership, if you want to do a face-to-face deal, then any dealership will buy your vehicle. All you have to do is drive up, go into the receptionist, say, yes, I want to sell my vehicle, my used car, and she'll page the used car manager or a sales manager. They could page a salesperson, and of course what they're going to try to do is to get you to trade your car on a new car because that's how they make money. But you just have to head that off at the pass. You say, no, not doing that. Just want a price of what you'll pay me for my car. Well, what are you going to do with it? That's none of your beeswax. Do you want to look at my car or not? And if they, okay, we'll make you an offer. Get it in writing, and it will be limited by time. So you get their offer in writing and have them put the date that that's good to. And then you walk out. You go to another dealership if you want to. But those are real solid cash offers that you can get. or you can call me, 423-552-2020. Tell me what your car is. I'll ask a lot of questions. I'll want some pictures. And I'll tell you what I'll pay for your vehicle. How's that for a deal? Now, if you live in, Colorado or Michigan, you're listening to the podcast, there's going to be a transportation cost involved, because it costs a lot of money to ship cars across the country, unless you can drive it here, but then you have to fly home or drive home in a new car. But that's a dilemma that a lot of people, or let's call it a trap, that a lot of people fall into. They get this information off their computer, and they assume that that's what some dealer is going to pay them for their car, or some individual, for that matter, is going to pay for the car. And so they build this, they start calculating payments, how much difference they're going to have to pay. They call and get their insurance. They've got all of these scenarios built that they think it's going to be reality. And more often than not, it's not. So the moral of that story, I guess, is get a real cash offer. That's what somebody is willing to pay for it. That's what your car's worth. Until you find somebody that's willing to pay more for it, that's what it's worth. And at this point, that's your only option, unless you just want to keep it. Another interesting thing happened the other day, I like to interact with people in my showroom over the old cars that I have in there. So I've got right now my 70 Ford Bronco. I've got the 1930 Model A Roadster in there, and I've got this 66 Mustang Fastback in there. And it's amazing to me how many people say, gosh, they don't build cars like they used to. And my pat response to that is, thank goodness. And they say, what do you mean by that? I said, if you were to get in that Bronco and drive it, you would not like it, because it has no power steering. It has no power brakes. I mean, you have to stand on it to get it to stop. And plus, it's 3 on the tree. What's that? Well, that's where you have to shift gears on the column. It's got a column shifter, a 3-speed, and it's not automatic. And, it's when you're trying to do that and get into a tight parking place with no power steering and no power brakes, you would be wishing you were in a modern Bronco, because that's not easy to drive. And you think that's hard to drive, you ought to drive a 1930 Model A, because you have to double clutch it to shift gears, because it's non-synchronized. What's that mean? Well, that means that if you want to downshift, you're coming up to a red light and you want to downshift, you either have to be completely stopped to shift it into first, or you have to be really good in your timing with a double clutch shift. And so that's where you push in the clutch the first time to take it out of gear. You let the clutch out. You push the clutch in again, rev up the engine a little bit, and put it in the other gear, and then let the clutch out. Because it's when I first drove that car, I had no idea how difficult that would be, especially when there's a line of cars behind you and you're stuck in between gears and you don't know what to do. My brain just flew away for just a few seconds. So no, thank goodness cars aren't made like they used to be. I love the old designs. I love the nostalgia, the history of the vehicles. What's the story of the Ford Mustang? All that stuff is just fascinating to me. But, as far as daily driving, my goodness, modern vehicles of just about any type are so much better, so much safer. And, quite frankly, they don't require quite as much maintenance as the old ones did. You used to have to change the oil, or you're supposed to change the oil about every 2,000 to 3,000 miles in older vehicles. And that was driven by a couple things. One was the quality of oil that you could buy. The other was the quality of fuel that you were running through the system. And, something to do with the machining and the way the engines are made. Now, you don't have to change the oil until the car tells you to change the oil. Or, I change the oil in my vehicles every 5,000 miles, and then I have my tires rotated every time I get the oil changed. It's just more convenient for me. I mean, you're supposed to rotate your tires every 6,000 miles, but I just kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You don't have to ever do a tune-up until you get about 100,000 miles on your vehicle. You don't have to do it then, as long as you're getting good fuel economy and it's not missing. Check engine light isn't on. Cars are lasting 2, 3, 400,000 miles properly maintained. If you keep the oil changed, you keep your transmission serviced, pay close attention to the way you drive, not a lot of sudden starts and stops and just all the different things that make it harder on a car to survive. Cars are a whole lot better than they were. One other example is they don't rust like they used to. The techniques that they use to build new vehicles, the primers that they use, the paint protection, it's just so much better. The types of metals are less resistant. The zinc-coated metals make a huge difference. They didn't have that back in 1970 or 80 for that matter. So all of these things make the modern car a lot better overall. So I'll be back in just 1 minute. One of the things that most customers despise is having to take their car back the second time to get it fixed. Well, I feel that way about my hip. This doctor has a comeback, and I'm not exactly sure what Medicare is going to say about paying for that whole surgery again. I hope they say, go ahead, no problem. I don't know what the warranty is on a hip replacement. But all he could do was say, I'm sorry, this is very rare for this to happen. It happens in less than 1% of the cases, and it's just a rare thing. But, rare things happen, and we just have to be prepared and trust the Lord and just pray about it, and hopefully everything will turn out okay. That's all that we can do. That's all that I can do. Well, thanks for listening to this edition of My Car Guru. Again, any issues, questions, if you need help determining the value of your vehicle, just send me a text, 423-552-2020, and we'll put something together that you can count on. And when you go into the dealership, you'll be prepared to be able to work a deal, because the trade-in is one of the most important things. It's one of the 4 targets that we talked about. Well, thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.